Welcome everyone to today's webcast from 3dprint.com. We are delighted to have you here. Our guest speaker today is Jon Cilley. He is the Chief Evangelist from Body Labs, and he's going to tell you how to use 3D body imaging to innovate in the apparel or footwear industry. So go ahead and take it away, Jon.
All right, hi guys. As you mentioned, my name is Jon Cilley, and I am the Chief Evangelist here at Body Labs, which is an interesting title to say the least. But what I want to talk to you today about, again, is the ability to be able to use 3D body imaging to innovate in the apparel and footwear industry. And so, brief agenda, what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about what this ghost economy is specifically, and kind of the three core components that are comprised of the ghost economy, what that means, some of the challenges that exist there. We're also going to talk about our recent 2016 apparel and footwear retail survey as well, and some of the things that we found out there related to fit issues, challenges there as well. And then we're going to kind of dive into recommendations. So now that I've kind of scared you about all the problems that exist within the fashion and footwear industry, we're hopefully going to provide you with some solutions and forward-thinking solutions that you can utilize in the future to resolve some of these challenges and issues. Now, those first 3 bullets or so are probably going to last around 30 minutes, and we'll probably have a quick poll question in between about 15 minutes in. And then from there, we'll probably reserve around 10 or 15 minutes for questions and answers. So quickly about me, I am Chief Evangelist, again, an odd title probably for many people that are on the webinar here. And I did author the 2016 Apparel and Footwear Retail Survey Report. Now, at the end of this webinar, we'll provide the link to that report if you want to dive a little bit deeper into the details of what that report entails. It's also available on our website as well. I've also spent 4 years before I arrived at Body Labs as head of Carbon Black product marketing and competitive intelligence. And for those of you not familiar with Carbon Black, it's actually a cybersecurity company, but we spent a variety of time focusing on POS systems within retail environments, so point of sale systems, holiday freeze periods, securing the industry in those areas as well. And so I have a variety of experience dealing in the retail space and providing a service to the retail environments as well. And then also spent 4 years as a government public relations officer and spokesperson on top of all that. So feel free to follow me on Twitter. I can see that my profiles, for better or for worse, are getting added in the chat profile. Feel free to also email me directly if you had additional questions you happen to not think of in the Q&A session later on after this webinar. Don't hesitate to email directly to me if you have individual questions about how Body Labs can help your business, either in the apparel space or in other verticals. Don't hesitate to reach out as well. And I also host a bi-weekly webinar with some of the other founders. Well, I'm not a founder, but some founders that are here at Body Labs about a variety of different issues within the 3D modeling space, etc. So the link is there for you guys to be able to subscribe. We're also available on a variety of other podcasting platforms, so don't hesitate to either subscribe or reach out to us that way. So let's just dive into it. Now, these numbers should be fairly obvious, okay? So the global fashion and apparel industry is a huge industry. It's a $1.2 trillion industry. And in fact, consumers themselves are spending $250 annually on apparel and footwear alone. Now, that's fairly obvious, but within this industry, there are a variety of hidden costs and challenges that exist within it. Now, one of which is referred to as the ghost economy by IHL Group, and it's largely unseen costs that are exhibited and absorbed by retailers, and it's largely comprised of 3 different areas. It's overstocks, it's out of stocks, and it's returns. Now, overstocks make sense, right? You've got a surplus of goods that sometimes you've got to sell at clearance, sometimes you're selling by retailers at a heavy discount, and you're incurring costs that way. You've got out of stocks, which become an issue where you can't meet the existing demand of consumers. And then returns, which is a major one that we're going to cover today, is not only the largest component of this ghost economy globally, but also when we look at the US specifically, it's comprises largely half of the ghost economy. And the reason for that is over the years, retailers have become increasingly better at inventory management. And as a result of those things, you've seen out of stocks and the costs that have absorbed in the out of stock area and the overstock area have gone down drastically. But returns are a largely unsolved issue. And in many ways, it's largely unresolved when we're talking about online retail environments. So when you break down the returns and returns that are specifically attributed to lack of fit, in fact, this past year in 2015, $8.4 billion worth of online sales were returned due to incorrect fit and size. And in fact, 54% were returned in store. Now, when you look at this and you say, okay, wow, I expected the online numbers to be substantially higher, it's a little bit misleading. And it's largely due to the fact that the online penetration or the penetration rate of online or e-commerce platforms is really only around 10%. What tends to happen is that consumers are shopping online, but no one's converting, okay? And it's a large part due to a variety of different things you probably think of off the top of your head. There's no way to validate size. There's no way to try anything on. There's no way to accurately extract measurement data about what your customers look like if you're the retailer, or if you're the customer, to understand what size is going to fit me and how is it going to look. So to compensate for this, retailers have largely tried to provide free returns for online or e-commerce platforms. In fact, last year, 49% of retailers now offer free online returns. Now, free returns are great, right? It means that you're largely going to have higher conversions. So awesome, right? What's the catch-22? Well, the problem is that higher conversions largely result in more returns. And it's largely due to just the nature of the beast, right? A recent example could be the fact that I know my girlfriend tends to do this, and some other people do this as well, especially when we're doing user testing for our technology, is that people will tend to buy multiple sizes of a given style for online. When they get those in, they'll figure out what size fits them and then return the other two. So you've now just offset the added benefit of offering free returns. You've increased your conversion rates, but you've ultimately offset it with absorbing all these larger costs related to free returns. So what the heck do we do about all this? Well, what we wanted to do is dive deeper. Us at Body Labs wanted to dive deeper into fit issues, return issues within the retail and footwear space. And so what we did was conduct a 2016 survey, a nationally representative survey of more than 1,100 respondents that comprised all different adult age groups, ethnicities, household incomes, etc. And what we arrived at was really around a 3% plus or minus margin of error, so fairly accurate representation of the U.S. Consumers. And when we looked at preference specifically, what we found is that 32% shop for clothing at least once a month. So great, high frequency, that's what we probably want to see. But 59% prefer shopping in-store compared to online. Now, this should be pretty obvious because the reason for that preference is that 76% try on clothing before purchasing and 91% try on footwear before purchasing. So great, makes sense, right? However, 46% ultimately hate, and I mean hate, trying on clothing in a fitting room. Now, why is this? Well, what does this actually mean? Well, people ultimately understand the value of trying on clothing, but they typically hate the process itself. It's tedious, it's time consuming. If you want to try multiple styles and mix and match things together to validate preference and all of these things, there's just I typically don't think I have the time, and survey respondents have revealed that as well, that nearly half of people legitimately hate the process itself. But as I mentioned earlier, 76% still understand the value associated with it. Now, you take in all of this stuff into account, and what we still found is that 23% of clothing purchases still in fact get returned. And the main culprit, unsurprisingly, is that 64% of those people blame poor fit. 57% blame poor fit related to footwear. And when you factor all this stuff in, you see where I'm going with this. A third of consumers are dissatisfied with the fit of traditional sizes. And we'll dive into some of the nuances and the problems that are maybe associated with the reason why people are dissatisfied with traditional sizes. But all that stuff included, 57% of consumers also only purchase apparel or footwear online from brands or styles that they know will fit them. Now, again, this makes sense, right? 76% of people are trying on clothing before they're converting, before they're purchasing in store. Now, typically, if you've already done that and you've already validated that, you're likely to not have to try on that clothing if you're repurchasing a similar style. Let's say you want to purchase a new wash of jeans that's in the exact same style and the exact same size. We're seeing the higher volume of online purchases happening with people exhibiting that behavior, that they've already purchased something in store, already validated it, and then now they don't need to really confirm any of those things because they've already gone through that process, the rigor of trying things on, the rigor of validating and buying it in a store. So now they can buy with relative confidence online. Now, what is the issue with all of these fit problems, right? Like, what is the major challenge here? Well, one issue is that brands are trying to fit really 7 billion people into fewer than 10 sizes, whether male or female, right? And with all of the variability in human body shape, there's just no way to meaningfully fit everyone in fewer than 10 sizes. They're also still using, brands and apparel companies are still using traditional methods that are proven methods to work in one-to-one engagements, whether let's say you're getting tailored in a store or you're converting someone individually at a store where you're using measurements and sophisticated tailors to be able to conduct those measurements. But it's very hard to do that and expand that at scale across a variety of different chains of stores or even online. And then on top of all of this, the way that they're conducting these sizes typically is that apparel and retail companies are usually using a singular fit model and linear grading rules for different sizes when they're coming up with these finite sizes. And so for those of you not familiar with what a fit model is, it's fairly representative of the image that you're looking at in the slide here. It's a physical, living, breathing person that encapsulates the assumed size, the ideal size of that apparel company, and they go through these fitting exercises based off of the assumed size of that particular fit model. And there's this whole process that we'll get into in a moment that they utilize to be able to design these sizes. Now, the further you deviate from the fit model, the less likely you are to have a size that's going to be meaningful to you and fit the way that you would hope and expect it to. Now, additionally, most apparel companies only have one fit model, one female fit model and one male fit model. And they use these linear grading rules to adjust for sizes. And so when I say grading, for those of you not familiar, it's, okay, now let's say your fit model at this brand is a size 0. And you want to go up to a size 2, a size 4, a size 6. You may provide 2 inches here, take an inch there, take an inch there, but they're based off of assumptions, not data, to be able to approximate those sizes. So there isn't a fit model for each given size. There's typically one fit model, male and female, and then there's this grading process that happens as a result. There's also these benefits and challenges that are associated with things like tech packs. So for those of you not familiar with what a tech pack is, it's usually developed by something like a technical designer. The technical designer is usually taking the designs that are developed by that fashion designer. So it could be something as simple as pencil and paper or sketch, or something more digital like a Illustrator, a digital Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator file. And it's the technical designer's job to take the approximation or the style and then convey that in a more technical document that can be then referenced and digestible by a manufacturer to produce a physical sample. And that physical sample then is provided back to the apparel company, And in turn, I'm going back a slide here to show you essentially the fitting, right? The sample itself will go back to the apparel company, the brand, and they'll usually be the fashion designer, the technical designer, and maybe a fit specialist, and they'll actually review the fit of now this physical produced sample on top of the living, breathing fit model, and they'll take in an inch here, they'll add an inch there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, they do this, they make those adjustments, they go back and they update the tech pack. The tech pack then gets delivered to the manufacturer. The manufacturer then produces another sample and rinse and repeat. Goes back, adjusts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you didn't detect it already, it's a fairly manual process that can be very cumbersome for these brands to get product to market faster and efficiently and cost effectively. And it's based off of a variety of assumptions because you're doing it based off of one singular fit model that is in turn representing the ideal sizes for an entire product line. So there's a better way to do things. Now, the reason for constrained sizes in the brand's defense is that typically you want to fit the maximum amount of sizes, or the maximum amount of people into the least amount of sizes, right? It's going to help improve your margins. It's going to make it more cost effective. This is largely due also to the fact that, I'm kind of hitting on the design process a little bit, but they just don't have the data about their individual customers, and the manufacturing process is still largely labor intensive and costly. So it makes sense that they would want to constrain their sizes. So we're going to talk about not only how can you provide things like custom clothing with different approaches, but then also how can you even improve your sizing moving forward as well. So I'm going to recap really quickly, and then after I get to the third bullet, we'll introduce the polling question. We have one polling question for you guys today, and then we'll move on to the rest of the presentation. But recap so far is, hey, ghost economy is a major issue, right? Returns are a huge factor as a part of that ghost economy. And then fit is a major component of those high return rates. Okay? So with that, I'm going to open it up for this quick polling question. I encourage you to fill it out, and we'll give you guys about a handful of seconds to be able to start answering it. It's just a quick yes or no question. If you happen to be not an apparel company on this webinar, feel free to answer no or not vote on this specific question, but just want to see where we're kind of landing here. And I'm actually surprised on the custom clothing percentages here, which is really interesting. So, okay, great. So we'll continue to monitor that poll as we go throughout the presentation. I might reference it when we get to the Q&A section if we want to kind of dive back into the slides here. So with all that said, what's the solution for this? You just scared the crap out of me if you're an apparel company. You probably already know what the problems that exist within this space. So what the heck do we need to do in order to be able to solve for these problems? Well, there are really, for me and from my perspective, there are really 3 steps for success to be able to resolve these issues. Number 1, I think you need to efficiently capture, store, and analyze your customer's body shape and measurements at scale. Okay? And we're going to dive into more detail of each of these 3 steps in a moment. Number 2, you need to seamlessly correlate that captured shape data or measurement data with the technical clothing designs. We'll talk again in detail about that in a second. And then you need to validate customer preference with external virtual try-on features, either in-store or online or both. Okay, so when we cover number 1, well, how the hell are we going to capture body shape at a high volume, at scale, and those measurements as well? Well, there's a variety of different approaches, as you can imagine. One approach could be 3D laser scanning technology. Now, there's some pros and there's some cons with this technology. Number 1, it's highly accurate, so great. It's fast as well and relatively seamless. But it's typically an expensive solution to deploy. It's not probably going to see user adoption. I doubt anybody's going to have a laser scanner kicking around at home. and it's largely immobile as well, the current state of this technology. If you're considering something like consumer depth sensors. So for those of you not familiar with what a consumer depth sensor is, it's very similar to something like Microsoft's Kinect sensor, which has been around with the Xbox for a while but can be used independently. Google Tango is other similar technology to that as well, which is actually arriving. This is a screenshot of Tango technology, but it's also arriving in consumer devices later this year. I think actually June 9th, this month, Lenovo announced a device, the Lenovo Fab 2 Pro, which will be the first consumer device that'll have this Tango depth sensor technology in a consumer smartphone you can purchase. And then also there's other things like Intel's RealSense technology as well. Now, great, it's a mobile device, it's relatively inexpensive compared to laser scanning, so you're talking about hundreds of dollars to purchase a new device as opposed to thousands of dollars if you were to purchase something like a laser scanner. And then it is seeing consumer adoption. However, there are some cons as well. There's lower quality with the laser scan or the quality compared to laser scans. And it's the user adoption is still relatively early. So I mentioned one device. There'll probably be a couple more this year that'll arrive with depth sensor technology, whether it's Tango or otherwise. But you'll probably see more ubiquity in the technology in the next year and a half or so. There's also these challenges with the data that's captured by the laser scan or captured by the depth sensor. So as you can see in this example, this is a representation of a laser scan. Now, to you and I, you could probably understand and see how this looks like an individual, how this looks like a person. But if you were to ask the computer, has no idea what it's looking at from a data perspective. And so there's also all these other challenges that exist with it as well. If you look at this blue circle on the slide, you can see, okay, there's data missing by the scanner, by the sensor, just didn't happen to capture it based off of how that data was scanned or how the individual was scanned. If you look at the blue circle, many scanning companies tend to use this practice called hole filling, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's joining the data in missing areas that the scanner failed to capture. But what you tend to do, and I don't know if you can see it as well, depending on how big your screen size is as you're watching this, but it tends to join data sometimes in really weird areas. So you get these anomalies where in this particular case, on this particular example, the upper thigh region was joined a little bit lower than you probably should have. And so if you're an apparel company and you want to do something like an inseam measurement to understand that, you're probably going to take an inaccurate measurement that's going to be 2 to 3 inches lower than you probably should be extracting it. And then if you want to consider some other things, these scanning approaches are typically very rigid. They're not reposable. So if you wanted to understand as an apparel company, not only how is this garment going to be looked and how is it going to drape on the individual when they're standing up, but how is it going to look if you're, let's say, performance gear. You want to understand how is it going to perform and look through something like a motion capture sequence to understand, okay, if somebody's on a treadmill, how is that garment going to look and perform? If you're doing business casual, you have a business casual collection, how is that going to look when somebody's sitting down at a computer desk and things like that? Very hard to be able to give you all of that insight that you could do with something like a fit model, a physical fit model. Very hard to do, at least currently, with existing laser scanner technology alone. Now, the third option, so we have scanning technology, you have depth sensor technology, then you have this measurement technology, which really isn't technology at all, but it's the same approaches we've used in the past. Now, it's of course very expensive. It's easily scalable. So if you're an e-commerce platform, it's very easy to ask someone for measurements because it's more likely that someone's going to be able to extract measurements of themselves than in fact actually scan themselves or have a 3D laser scanner or depth sensor at home, at least today. But there's all of these issues where it's prone to human error. So you have consumers that are likely not going to be able to accurately extract their measurements, but they're probably going to take it from inconsistent locations. So it's scalable in the fact that you could ask this information of people, but it's maybe not as scalable or as standardized as apparel companies would like to be able to ensure they're extracting measurements from the same consistent locations. So with all three solutions, you still need a way to process this data. So here at Body Labs, we take an approach where we can take that raw data, whether it's from scanners, whether it's from depth sensors, whether it's even basic measurements, and we can process it now into a model that the computer can understand. So in this specific example, if you look at this image, the blue dots in this image represent more or less the scan or the depth sensor. Now, what we can do is we start with this understanding of human body shape. So we start with teaching the computer what a human body looks like. And then we reference the captured data about that individual so that we can provide an aligned body that then morphs to the data that we've captured. So we can take that scan data and then align it so that we can adjust it. So if this subject happened to have more of a belly or a stomach, we would then morph that existing template of what a human looks like to be able to align it. And what that enables us to do is remember all those anomalies we talked about with the scans. Remember the incomplete data, the inability to be able to repose, the anomalies that existed with joining the data inconsistently. We can account for that by starting with that understanding of body shape. If we can do so at a very, very millimeter level of accuracy to enable you to do all sorts of things we're going to get to in a moment. And again, I'll just add as well, we can also use things like basic measurements. So, if people don't need or people don't have scanning technology at home, which they're not likely to have, or the depth sensor technology at home, you can imagine from an e-commerce platform, asking them very basic sets of measurements that they are probably likely to have a higher degree of knowing at an accurate level. So like their weight, their height, their waist, things like that, basic measurements. And then using that information the same way that I just outlined in the previous slides to be able to produce a full model that we can deliver using this approach with sub-centimeter accuracy on average, which is perfect for custom clothing. It's perfect for sizing recommendations. And it enables you to also extract all sorts of additional measurements as well on top of once you've actually produced that model. So that enables you to do all sorts of other things, like seamlessly correlate that captured shape data that you now have of your customer with the measurement data as well. So taking that measurement data you never had about your customers, but you now have, then correlating it with the measurement data you've always had about the garments because you've needed it to be able to manufacture clothing. So in this example, we're using the earlier example of the tech pack. And then you can do all sorts of clever things like sizing recommendations or custom clothing. But there's all sorts of other additional hidden benefits to collecting your customer's body shape and measurements at scale. Not only is it important in this given example to be able to do sizing recommendations and custom clothing, which is really good on a one-to-one conversion rate. So it's going to help you convert that individual customer purchasing an individual set of goods. But how can I use the data I've now captured about my customer to do other things, like informed design? So in this particular case, let's say you've deployed a solution like Body Labs or another company, and you've deployed it at scale, and you have a variety of customers that are digitizing their body shape efficiently and transacting. Well, based off of that information, wouldn't it be great to take that and average that data set together to tell yourself, okay, from everyone that purchased size smalls, I want to understand what is my average size small, or I want to understand what is my average size large from everyone that purchased larges. And from there, I can inform design and use something like a 3D CAD program to be able to digitize that whole tedious workflow and process I mentioned before, using tech packs, using fit models, and do that in a digital sense to be able to streamline and make it more cost effective and more accurate for my business. And throughout all this process, it's going to help you reduce returns, it's going to increase conversions, and it's going to improve your sizes moving forward, so that even if you're not a custom clothing company and you still want to focus on a finite list of sizes, it enables you to understand what your customers actually look like. And to go one step further, let's say someone was going through this entire process and didn't convert. Maybe you want to understand what that average size looked like as well. And want to understand, okay, was my existing sizing right or wrong, depending on what I now know about my customer, and how do I want to improve moving forward to capture more of that customer base moving forward. And then the third piece is you want to validate customer preference with external virtual try-on features in store or online. So what do I mean by that? Well, fit is one thing, which we've talked a lot about today, but preference is another. So fit for me is, okay, hey, is it falling down or can I not get it on? Preference is, how is it going to look based off of the style I know I like? So I may prefer tighter fitting clothing than my brother or my friend, or that you may. And how can I verify and make the same decisions I would normally do? Remember, 76% of people want to try on clothing and do try on clothing before they convert, before they purchase items. So how can I make those same decisions, and how can I do that in an e-commerce platform to be able to do that? So in this particular example, this is a solution that I'm giving you kind of an early peek at, that we're building with a partner of ours, Intervisual, where we're digitizing body shape, and they are in fact digitizing the 3D garments themselves. And we're correlating those two things together, very similar to an example I had given before, to be able to accurately display not only your body shape, but also the garment itself, with how tight is it going to fit on your specific body type. So in the heat mapping to the right of this slide, you can see that the orange areas are tighter fitting areas, the whiter areas are looser fitting areas. And how does that fit into your preference? If it's bunching up at your ankles, is that good? Is that bad based off of your preference? And so it enables you to make the similar decisions to decisions you would make if you were shopping in store. And given to the constraints of the presentation tools we have here, I can't show you how dynamic it is, but it's actually, you can rotate in 360 to see the full garment on your entire body type, switch out different styles, and then also understand what size is going to work out for you best as well. Now, with all that said, harking back to the survey, if we asked individuals or consumers that if you solve for fit issues, they said that 85% of them would purchase more during a single transaction, and 58% will purchase more frequently. So if 32% of people are already purchasing once a month, you're going to increase that frequency, and you're going to get higher volume purchases. You're going to drive down the cost of returns, you're going to increase conversions, and you're going to enable people to shop with confidence online. So from my perspective, it's a no-brainer. I'm a little bit biased because I'm here at Body Labs. But with all that said, I really think if you take these three approaches, where you're efficiently capturing, storing, analyzing your customer's body shape and measurements at scale, you're seamlessly correlating captured customer shape or measurement data with, and then correlating that with the technical clothing designs. And then you're validating customer preference with external virtual try-on features in store or online, you're going to win. You're going to win, and you're going to be happy you did it. So with that said, I want to thank you for sitting into this webinar. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's a link below to our retail survey. If you want to dive a little bit deeper into more of the statistics in that report, I encourage you to go there. It's also available on our homepage, and I understand the link is a little bit long, so if you don't want to write it down here, we'll have it attached in the slides as well for you guys. So with that, I'll pass it off back to Carmen.
John, nice job. We have a ton of questions. So people are asking a lot of technical and detailed questions, so let's run through some of those. So Carol McDonald asked at the beginning, do the tech packs state the tolerances of the measurements?
The tolerance of the measurements. So from our perspective, I'm a little unclear on that. It depends in many cases, sometimes on the brands as well. So I'm not quite sure on that one actually. But to answer your question, it's something from an apparel side that is really at the discretion of the brand itself.
And can you tell us a little bit, Carol McDonald also asked about the security impact of customer data from measurements, data storage, and limited access?
Sure. So, I come from a security background. As I mentioned earlier, I spent 4 years at Carbon Black working to secure retail environments and things of that nature. And so, yes, of course, with any time you're storing personal information of a customer, you want to handle security with the utmost amount of respect. And so at least I can only speak for Body Labs specifically that any personal data that we store has the utmost level of security, and we take the maximum level of precautions possible to ensure that we're securing your data.
And Carol had asked, or sorry, let's maybe move on to some of the other questions here.
Okay.
So, I mean, you can feel free, if you see them in the chat, you can feel free to.
Yeah, sure. Let me just scroll through here. So what are the best scanners out right now? Which was a question that was asked. It varies on exactly what you're trying to do. So we view ourselves as being scanner agnostic. As I mentioned before, and maybe didn't quite mention fully, is that we're not a hardware company. We're a data and we're a software company. And that gives us the freedom to be able to integrate with a whole host of different hardware providers. And so whether it's something like Human Solutions, whether it's something like 3DMD, as I mentioned, depth sensors, we're exploring a variety of those different depth sensing technology to be able to integrate with those things as well. And so really we don't have a preference. What we're really trying to explore here is to provide this technology as easily and as efficiently for people. And that's why I also mentioned the solution that isn't even really reliant upon scanning technology, that actually uses just measurements, basic measurements. And what I should also add is because we have this statistical approach to body shape and this kind of underlying understanding of body shape, it affords us the opportunity to be able to predict accurate measurements with that sub-centimeter accuracy using just those basic measurements. So if somebody happens to enter in a handful of measurements they probably know about themselves, their height, their weight, their waist, inseam, maybe chest or bust, we can take those measurements and we can actually produce additional measurements that the consumer is likely not going to know about themselves, is likely not going to be able to measure about themselves with a high degree of confidence, and produce those to the retailers, to the apparel companies very efficiently and from the same consistent locations so that they can truly standardize their measurements around that body shape. So let me look here. It looks like, is weight really needed? Seeing another question from Carol. Is weight really needed for shape data? Who's going to answer that accurately? That is true. That is something that we've tried to account for as well. What we've typically found is that men tend to overestimate their height and women tend to underestimate their weight. So we are fully aware of that, and that's why we ask for some additional measurements on top of that. And when we talk about the statistical approach, it weights and factors in a variety of different components to digitize body shape. So weight is an important component, but it's not the only factor. And so we are fully aware of the kind of underestimation in certain areas and the overestimation in other areas as well.
I really like this question from Michael. What is your best guess for the future of the body scanning capture? 3D photo booth, 3D scanner, or as simple as technology on your phone?
Sure. So my hope is My hope is, I could go on and on about this. My hope is consumer depth sensors. So the reason for that is, if you probably detected, depth sensors are kind of, in my opinion, in this Goldilocks zone. You've got measurements that, as you alluded to, some people alluded to in their questions, that have their inherent challenges, right? Where people are underestimating things, people are overestimating things. We've found ways to account for that, so we can deliver sub-centimeter accuracy, as I mentioned earlier. And then laser scans are really accurate. So our statistical model, when I talk about it, we can trust the data more from a laser scan than we ultimately would trust of measurement data based off of those anomalies we just talked about. So then you've got this Goldilocks zone where the laser scans are really expensive but accurate. The measurements are the kind of least accurate but the least expensive. And you got depth sensors kind of smack dab in the middle, where there's this Goldilocks zone of comparable accuracy related to affordable price. And so my hope is that moving forward, we'll see widespread adoption of this. And my assumption is that as well. And there are a variety of reasons for depth sensors to be in smartphones independent of body modeling technology. I understand that. And it's those other additional reasons that will, I think, preempt depth sensing technology to be more ubiquitous in smartphones moving forward. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I really expect higher volume and larger amounts, or larger unit numbers of devices to really be available for consumers that have this technology in it, probably within like a year to a year and a half time frame at like a large scale.
David Past asked the question, can you bake textures onto your body models?
Absolutely, absolutely. So texture mapping is an incredibly valuable approach. So it's interesting, we've obviously done a variety of user testing with this technology, and oftentimes what we found is there's this like happy medium, you got to find as well, where how much do you want to make the model itself, when you're doing things like virtual try-on, actually look like the person, meaning from a texture map perspective, skin tone, facial, texture mapping as well. And so right now what we found is many people are uncomfortable looking at their body, so that when we have, and you've seen in the examples in this presentation, we have gray models that enable many people that have that problem really looking at their body. It helps them disconnect from themselves, where they understand it's going to be accurate, they understand they're getting value, and they understand what they're looking at, but it's not as true to life if you were to provide texture mapping. And some people want texture mapping as well. So in other verticals where we're exploring animation pipelines, being able to plop your virtual body shape into something like a video game, texture mapping will become incredibly important. And so it's absolutely something we can do today.
And maybe if you want to scan the questions a second, we've got time for about one more. And while you're taking a look, John, I can tell everyone seems to have loved this presentation, and many of you are asking, will the recording be available? Will the slides be available? And the answers are yes and yes. We will email you after the session with a link, and the recording won't be posted immediately, but it will be posted in about a day. So so you will definitely have access to the recording and to the slides. I think John is planning to send either a link to the slides or the actual slides to all of you. And it looks like some more questions are coming into the chat. John, any thoughts?
Let's see here. I guess I need to scroll first. How to get better understanding.
And Carol, you were asking about the links in the chat. Yes, so everything will be included in the recording. And if you would like a copy of the chat transcript, just you can email us and in response to the follow-up.
Yeah, so I think there's maybe one more question that we'll answer, and then maybe we'll let everyone go. Who owns the data that is captured? Which is a really great question from Juliana. And it depends, to be honest with you. So today, we're working to, provide either the data where it's hosted and stored specifically by that retailer, by that apparel company. And then oftentimes we can store that data as well. Now there are benefits of both approaches depending on what your goals are. We love to store the data because it's not only going to improve our technology moving forward, but we can provide some additional benefits to the apparel companies as well, things like averaging and other things like that. And so ultimately it depends on what your goals are, but the answer today is both. Whether you want to store it yourself or host it and own it yourself, or whether you would prefer us to do it for you.
Jon, thank you so much for all of your insights today. We are delighted that you were able to present for us, and 3D Print is very delighted to have you here as a guest. And I want to, we can all say goodbye to Jon, and if you have additional questions for Jon, you can reach out via email. He will also follow up with you.